Hi, I'm Lily Peterson.
And I'm Paul Wilson. Welcome to Beyond Benefits with Benefits Pro. In this episode, we talk to Allison De Paoli, founder and principal of Altique and our newly minted 2026 Benefits Pro Advisor of the Year. But first, it's been a while. We've had a little bit of a hiatus, so I'm going to take a few minutes to catch up with my co-host Lily and our producer Zach. How are things going, guys?
Good.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been a while. I feel a little rusty here, but I hopefully we'll get back into the swing of things. But Zach, why don't you kind of let us know one of the reasons? We're not blaming it on you, but you've had a few things going on that might have contributed a little bit to our pause.
Oh, feel free to put it all on me. Well, let's see. I took 4 weeks of family leave because my wife and I had our second child in April.
Woo! Woohoo!
And yeah, I'll add an applause sound effect after that. But then also because nothing can be easy, I also moved from the Cincinnati area to Minneapolis, I think 2 weeks after my family leave ended. So I've basically been out for about 2 months.
Yeah, that is quite a schedule you've had going. I mean, you might as well just get a puppy or something too, right? I mean, I feel like you guys are probably bored at this point.
Yeah.
We thought about it. The building we're in, there's lots of dogs, and every time we see one, we're like, maybe.
Nice.
You're like, we can handle that. We can handle a dog.
Well, someone told me when we were talking about our schedule, apparently what we did isn't that uncommon. And the thing I heard multiple times was once you have a baby, you've maxed out on how tired you can be. So just try doing everything at once and just get it all over with. So
Yeah, I think there's something to that. I ran into somebody the other day that had, I think, like a 6-month-old baby, and then they had a brand new puppy too, and they were saying the same thing. Like, we figured we were already exhausted. We weren't going to sleep. We might as well just lean into it. So,
yep,
yeah.
just rip the Band-Aid off.
Awesome. Well, congratulations. That's so exciting. Yeah, we plan to be back on a more regular basis going forward. But yeah, so glad to be back with you two. Real fast, any fun summer plans? I will say so far mine has been pretty relaxed. We've had some kind of casual neighborhood summer concerts that we've gone to. And then I went up to Boulder a couple of weeks ago. They have a really cool Shakespeare festival. It's the second longest running in the nation. And so we took my son, my wife and I went and saw 12th Night, which was amazing. It's an outdoor theater and it was just wonderful. So that's kind of been our summer so far. And then we're headed up to the mountains this coming weekend as we record this, up to Grand Lake, to kind of just have a casual condo kind of weekend. But yeah, how about you guys? What are your plans and what have you been doing so far this summer?
I'm going to Wisconsin this coming weekend to surprise my dad for his birthday. So that will be fun. And we'll just go on the boat, drink a bunch of Leinenkugel. Yeah. And then I come back, and the next day I leave for Florida for the 4th. So that'll be fun. Hopefully I'll be tan. And then I will also have a million beers on the beach. So big
I'm sensing
things.
a trend here. Yeah.
Yeah.
For those who don't know, Lily is always going somewhere. I can't even keep track of where she is. We need to start having that be part of the podcast, is where in the world is Lily. But nice. Well, it sounds like fun. How about you, Zach?
So the thing that we keep hearing from everyone is we have to go up to the Duluth area to see Lake Superior. So that is our big goal. So I think everyone on this intro is going to some body of water in the next couple of weeks. So
Nice. We're nothing if not consistent.
Yes.
Well, now that you're up in that area, Zach, I know that you're a book guy. We talk about it all the time. Lily is a book person too. I know that the Twin Cities area is great for bookstores. There's a lot of really cool publishers up there. So we'll have to compare notes off the air about some
Absolutely.
places. Yeah.
And any suggestions you have, please.
Yeah. And that goes out to the audience too. Anybody out there who knows any. Very cool. Well, good to catch up with you both. And, speaking of keeping busy, let's move on to someone who's been having quite a year so far. Here's our conversation with Advisor of the Year, Allison De Paoli, where we cover everything from healthcare reform and direct primary care to employee communication and the future of the benefits industry. But as always, we also spend some time getting to know Allison a little bit better too, from her favorite travel experiences and recommendations to a few insider tips about the San Antonio area, as well as some insights into how she recharges when she's away from work.
Joining us today is Allison De Paoli, founder and principal at Altique Consulting. Welcome to Beyond Benefits, Allison.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we are so glad you're here. We haven't seen you for a little bit since we were all together to celebrate the crowning of the 2026 Advisor of the Year. How have things been going? I assume, lots of parades and people have been taking you out to dinner left and right.
Well, there was a whole lot of love after that, which I am very grateful for. It was very affirming of what we do here, and because we do things a little bit differently, and it was very gratifying to have that recognized. And I had texted one of my clients who had written a letter of support, and his response to me was there any doubt? And well, yes, there was. But that was also very gratifying. So there was a lot of support from everybody in my orbit. Local people have noticed. I have gained some traction where I had not for a bit. So it has been very gratifying and very helpful, and I'm very grateful for it.
Well, good. It was very well deserved. And I've said this before publicly, but I think what we aspire to do with the prize, with the award, is just to shine a spotlight. I mean, we know firsthand all the great work that a lot of advisors are doing out there, but many of you may feel like sometimes you're toiling in obscurity, or maybe, the spotlight doesn't always shine on you. So anything that we can do to kind of spread the word about the good work you're doing, we're happy to do it. So I'm glad it's been paying off.
It has.
So for those who aren't familiar with you and your company, would you mind giving a little bit, some background about yourself, your company, and kind of what your day-to-day looks like?
Sure. So I run a small business. So I think that the best title for what I do is chief cook and bottle washer. So I do everything. We all do everything. Some of us do some things better than others, as is in most businesses. But we've been around in this iteration for about almost 8 years now, and we help mid-size employers. Our definition of a mid-size employer is 100 to 1,000 employees, and more specifically 100 to 500. I feel that market is incredibly underserved. They're at the size where they feel that they need real advice, and I think that's a really valid, accurate perception. But they're going to some of our big box friends for that advice, and because of their size, they're not getting great advice, they're not getting great information, and they're getting the B or the C team. And I know that's a little bit harsh, but that doesn't mean that it's not true. And we see a lot of people that are fully insured and should not be. We see a lot of lack of compliance education that we fill in the gap. Our best clients, the ones that we can do the best work for, come to us and say, look, it's a lot of money. We'll spend it, but could somebody find it useful? Because we get a lot of complaints. And our clients are not trying to cut costs to cut costs. They're trying to be fiscally responsible, and they're trying to do the right thing by their teams. And I think that latter part is really important. It makes them really fun to work with.
I love that. We'll get a little bit more into the weeds here as we move along, but I know I've heard you talk before about how, early on in your career, there was a particular single mother who declined her own coverage because she couldn't afford her children's premiums. And I know that you probably come across a lot of those. Yes, we're looking at numbers, we're looking at data, we're looking at the big picture, but how do those kinds of personal stories and experiences continue to kind of influence the day-to-day decisions that you make?
I think they're very impactful to the day-to-day decisions that I make. I think there's a lot of bashing that goes on in our industry of other vendors and how employers are doing things. We live in this space. We know. If you don't live in this space, you don't know. And I think that a significant part of our job is to educate people as to what is possible. I think there's a very broad perception, and certainly not just in the healthcare space, but that more expensive is better. And in our world, we know that's not true. And how I explain it to people is you don't want the most expensive guy doing your knee because the most expensive guy does 20 a year. You want the guy that does 500. You want him in somebody's knee every week. And because he works with the same team, he knows what the complications are, there is a process, and he doesn't want to see you again. It doesn't mean you pay the cheapest price, but you probably want to pay in the bottom quartile of price. And when you say it that way, that makes a little bit more sense to people. But if you're not in this world, your natural inclination is to go to the most expensive resource. And that's clearly not helping anybody.
And it's a little bit counterintuitive because in many other parts of our lives, we're kind of trained, whether it's true or not, to think that more expensive equals higher quality. But in healthcare, that is, to your point, not only often not the case, but often it's the exact opposite.
Correct. So we do a lot of that. We have a situation right now where we have somebody that is mortified and embarrassed about the cost of her procedure, and it's not her fault. It is totally not her fault. Now, her employer has gone out of their way to tell her that and that she shouldn't be concerned. I've gone out of my way to tell her that. My team has gone out of their way to tell her that, but she got the bill and she about died. And in all fairness, the price is just insane. I think the best way to explain it is when PE gets involved and the only goal becomes sucking all the revenue out. This is what is happening in one of my plans, happening in all my plans, but this is a perfect example of that happening in one of my plans, and something that should cost about $15,000 is $33,000 twice a year. That's
Wow.
not nothing.
No.
That's something. Is it horrible? No. But if it's happening all over your plan, it's a problem.
That is pricey, in my opinion. Well, you gave great examples above, but you talk about how benefits shape real lives and not just spreadsheets. How do you balance the hard financial realities of a company's bottom line while also maintaining employee humanity and choices?
I think they go hand in hand. I think if you go back to that idea that the highest quality care is normally in the bottom quartile of cost, and I don't ever say the cheapest because nobody wants cheap healthcare. And if it's not good, you definitely don't want it. But I think the bottom quartile of cost is typically where the highest quality care is delivered. And what that means is sometimes things that people don't like. For example, a primary care physician can manage 75 or 80% of what somebody needs over their lifetime. Now, if your femur is sticking out of your leg, you're having a heart attack, or you have cancer, you need a specialist. But for the garden variety versions of those things, you don't. You need a doctor who knows who you are. And we can't do it in every plan, but where we do it, we consistently see that low level claim amount drop, often by 50% or more. We have a client that, and they're not that big. They've got about 90 people on their plan. The year that we took them over, the prior year, they had $447,000 of claims under $10,000. They will finish this year after their DPC costs with a number just under $200,000. That is a significant savings. And they call the doctor, they text the doctor, they do video with the doctor. They're not always in the doctor's office. And so people are accessing things that they need, and the cost is 50% of what it was the year before, including the DPC fee, which I think people often leave out. And we have another client that has about 800 employees and an on-site clinic. They've got a little over 500 employees accessing the on-site clinic. And the members that use the on-site clinic cost the health plan, after all of the DPC costs, $1,200 less per employee per year. So that's a little over $500,000. Even with an employer that size, that is a meaningful number.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, you're talking about some of the innovative things that you're doing. I mean, you and other advisors have become well known for maybe pushing back on the way things have always been, being pretty outspoken about how brokers who are bringing the same old solutions that they did 10, 15, 20 years ago, are not acting in their clients' best interests.
Mm-hmm.
But we all know that in an industry this big and this kind of stuck in the past in many ways, that doesn't always go over well. So I would just be curious, how is that kind of battle or that push going, and what specific pushback do you get from the industry when you are challenging the way things have always been done?
I'm very cautious. I don't want to bash a person in those environments. I know a number of them, and they're lovely human beings for the most part, and they try to do the right things for their clients. So I don't know that bashing people or necessarily publicly bashing a company is the right way to manage change, because I think that you are immediately in an adversarial position, and I don't believe that that's how change happens well. One of the things that we do here at Altique is we consult, we don't just broker. So we have several clients that are larger that feel that they need a large name brokerage firm, and I provide strategy and the brokerage firm executes the strategy with more and less success. And some of that is the pace of change that the employer is willing to accept. And that's fine. But for one of our clients, we've had the same broker and the same consultant. I helped pick the broker. And for 7 years, we sit in a room at renewal and we yell at each other in a most friendly way about what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And literally, the employer has learned they don't get in the middle. They let us duke it out. And then we look at them and say, okay, what are you going to do? And sometimes they do what I ask, and sometimes they do what the broker asks. And the broker now calls me when they want to do something and says, we'd like to do this. What do you think? And I'm usually pretty supportive of those things. And the other thing that I've noticed is that they rely on me for vendor selection because they can't choose some of the vendors that I do. And so it's a very interesting dynamic.
Yeah, it is. And I think it speaks to something that I think in my time in the industry, I've noticed that there is more of what you just described, where it's kind of more realistic approach. Yes, we want to create big change. We want to create big ripples, but we also have to deal with kind of the realities in which we exist and continue to push, but to do so in a way that's kind of sustainable. So it sounds like maybe that's kind of one of the shifts that you're seeing as well.
I mean, I'm a clap clap change girl. I think, oh, we should just change it and it's fine. Not everybody's like, most people are not like that, and they need a little bit of time to think about it and a little bit of, okay, we're going to change this one tiny little thing. We're going to change this one tiny little thing until they're comfortable with larger kinds of change. This is more psychology than anything else. You are dealing with somebody's health. I think that's a pretty personal subject. So when you mess with how they engage in the system, unless you have a really good reason for doing so, they don't like it. And can you blame them?
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Well, one of the specific strategies you often mention and even, brought up a minute ago is direct primary care. Why do you think more employers haven't adopted the DPC model, and what is holding them back from doing so?
Part of it is lack of choice. Part of it is not wanting to choose a physician for their employees because, again, very personal. I am a very big believer in the model that we on this podcast would call advanced primary care. That isn't virtual primary care. It's not urgent care on steroids. It is a doctor who you have access to, or you have access to somebody on their team 365 days a year that you can call, you can text, you can do a video chat with. It is a personal relationship. Those are the things that work. In any group of 100 people, you may get 70 or 80 to use that system, but there are going to be people that are not going to, for whatever reason. They have their own doctor that they love, and they've had that doctor for 20 years, and they're not changing. They think that the employer is going to have access to their medical information. Employers do not have access to that medical information. They think that, and maybe they need a little bit of time to be disabused of that, or maybe they're never going to be disabused of it. So we think you have to build a plan that helps guide people in that direction and makes it worthwhile for them to do so, but always leaves a little bit of an out so that people can have their own personal agency. One of the most hysterical conversations that I have it regularly, is somebody doesn't want to go to the DPC and then they don't want to pay their copays. They said, well, I have to go to the DPC. No, you don't have to. Yes, I do. I said, no, you don't. You have a whole network. You can pay your copay, but then I have to pay. Yes, you do. It's just a standard conversation we have, and we have it at every open enrollment. We get 1 or 2 questions a year, and over time that settles a little bit. But people really like free healthcare. But if you're going to offer free healthcare, you have to, as an employer, be able to control the cost structure. And you can only do that if you can control the contracting.
I'm sure that it varies very much from employee to employee and employer to employer, but generally speaking, do you feel like the appetite for change and kind of the acceptance of some of these ideas and people being comfortable with the idea of some of this shifting, is it getting better, or do you think it's still very much just a case by case?
I think that people who have not had significant interactions with the healthcare system are still on the it's not bad enough for me to change how I engage in the system. People with chronic ongoing conditions are much more aware of how messed up our system is and have a bigger appetite for change.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that kind of ties into the next question I was going to ask you. You know, you're a relatively small brokerage, but you take a pretty hands-on approach when it comes to a lot of these things, including employee communication. How big of a role does that play, just the day-to-day communication when you're introducing these kinds of ideas? And then how have you learned to kind of scale that as you've grown and kind of maintain that high-level customer service while still being able to like sleep and give your employees PTO and things like that?
So I firmly believe that we all have lives and that nobody on my team, including me, is a rocket scientist or a brain surgeon. So typically work needs to be done, but it doesn't need to be done at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So we also have a relentless focus on automate, delegate, eliminate. So Claude is our best friend. We have very strict security protocols, but we do not put any kind of PHI, any acronym you want to use there. None of that information goes into AI, but it does improve our processes quite a lot so that we don't have the administrative load that other agencies do, because we've just moved beyond that. The goal of that is not for us to go get our hair done at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, although in all fairness, that does happen. The goal of that is to be able to talk to a person when a person needs something. And if you can arm people with enough information that they can mostly help themselves, one, they like that. And two, when they need help, if somebody can call them back pretty promptly, then we can usually solve their issue pretty quickly. Not always, but most of the time. And we're good at directing people, go here, find this. We also provide a lot more tools than many firms, not all, but many, with the typical kind of communication that you would expect. But we also, particularly for our self-funded clients, we do year-round communication campaigns. So we'll do a pre-enrollment campaign. This is coming. This has changed. You need to know this. We do the enrollment. We do a post-enrollment campaign for 6 or 8 weeks. And basically we go through every benefit. Okay, medical, here's how it works. Dental, here's how it works. Vision, here's how it works. We don't worry about who's enrolled in what. We just send it out. We send it out via email and we send it out via text message. We also have microsites for all of our clients so that they have access to benefit guide, every vendor, an explanation about every benefit. They can get to Employee Navigator if they need to make any changes. Our contact information is there. And we do all that not because I believe that they're going to remember anything that we say. I don't think they do. But what we see happen regularly when we do that is that when somebody runs into a problem, they will respond to one of those messages. And they just, whatever one they have in their email or in their inbox. And they're very concise, and we don't do it every week. We do it once or twice a month. And they'll say, I need to know this. We also have a chatbot on our microsites that you can ask a question. So if you need to know what a deductible is, or you need to find somebody's phone number, those calls don't really come to us. They go there. And I think for a phone number or a deductible or a what's this and what's that, that's great. But then that, again, frees up time for us to talk to people who are having a challenge.
No, that's a great answer. I mean, you mentioned AI. Obviously, that's top of mind for everybody these days. Do you have one or two examples of how you're using AI in a way that you think has been most significant to save you that time that you can actually spend it with people?
So we don't reconcile invoices every month for our clients, but we do reconcile the first invoice to make sure that all of the open enrollment changes have happened. And, sometimes that'll take 2 billing cycles to do that. We now feed those into our sandbox, and it takes about 3 minutes rather than the time that it used to take. I think that's the simplest, easiest, clearest example of, okay, these are the changes. This is the invoice. It is a completely private environment. What's missing? And we get a little list, and then off we go to fix whatever it is that we're missing, if we're missing anything at all. And that has been a small, very effective tool.
Yeah. No, that's exactly the kind of thing I was looking for, because I find that with AI, those types of things is where I really see the value. It won't surprise you to hear, and I'm sure Lily agrees with me, as like a creative type, a journalist, an English major, when it comes to to the writing and a lot of that stuff, I still get a little squicky about the whole thing. But some of those tasks that it can do, to your point, that just cut huge amounts of data and time and can look through, vast amounts of words or numbers or whatever the case may be and cut it down. I think that's perfect. So yeah, thank you.
It does. And we've started doing a strategy memo, and we've always done them for employers, but we've just started doing them for employees. So when we do a renewal, we have a brief conversation with employees about this is what happened, this is what's happening now, and why. And when you can get past that employee employer distrust, because I think that's quite prevalent, when you can get past that, an employee can see, oh, they spend this much money and now we're going to have to spend this much money. And this is how we're kind of ameliorating that. And this is how we've improved the plan. And we've had to cut back a little here. It tends to be less upsetting to people because they have a better understanding of what's happening.
I love that. Well, kind of going off of that, when you are speaking to a skeptical CEO or CFO who, feels really trapped and overwhelmed by these rising healthcare costs, how do you tailor your educational approach when you're speaking to them in a scenario like this?
So I have a couple of examples that are fairly powerful, but I don't think that that is the driver of change. One of the big concerns that employers have is the extra work for their HR teams. There's no fat on HR teams. Our HR teams are typically understaffed already, so they don't want any additional work on their HR team. And obviously change for employers. But the thing that seems to make the most sense is we talk about contracting and how really you can address a significant portion of the problems if you address the contracting. Right? If you have a transparent PBM contract and you've got audit rights to it and you can see what's going on, and you have a creditable prior authorization process that is not going to abuse people, but is going to apply standards. All right. So that's one thing. That's one bucket. And, we know that that's the easiest bucket to fix, but you got to fix 8 things until you get to that bucket. Then we also talk about how the role of the broker is not to manage the plan. The role of the broker or the consultant or advisor or whatever you want to call them is much more like a general contractor. The general contractor is typically not doing the electrical work, the framing, the concrete, the roof, the whatever else. They're hiring the vendor that fits the spec and holding the vendor accountable. And that seems to make a lot of sense. And then they're like, okay. And they might be willing to change 1 or 2 things. And I would change everything. And we have changed everything in 30 or 60 days, but it's a lot for people.
Well, following up on that, how have you seen the C-suite change, if at all, over the last few years? Because I know a few years ago, I was hearing a lot of conversations about who advisors are actually sitting down to speak with. Like historically, it was often HR. HR could sometimes also be considered a gatekeeper to the CFO or the CEO or some of these other people. But I get the impression that the C-suite continually has been shifting. And again, I know that probably varies from company to company, but like when you're sitting in on a lot of these meetings, do you feel like there's certain people who are making the decisions now that are different, or is it more of a collaborative approach involving all of them, or how does that look these days?
I feel that it works best when the CFO and the HR are working together, because this is not just a money problem and it is not just a people problem. It is a both problem. So when you have both people kind of working towards the same goal, as long as they agree on what the goal is, and if it's all right with you, I'll give you a couple of examples. I have a client that the head of HR was much more on this costs too much and we have to get it under control. And the CFO was like, hold on, we really want people to have a good experience. Let's not get all carried away. Okay, so that is very unusual. Then I have another prospect, they're never going to be a client, where the CEO and CFO are applying financial pressure, and the head of HR feels that she is protecting the employees from the CEO and the CFO. There's never going to be any change there. And that's okay. That change is not for everybody. And you have to do what works best for you as the employer and in your role, if that's the head of HR or the head of finance or the CEO, right? Like you all have to determine that internally. My job is not to tell you what to do. It's just to support what it is you want to accomplish. But they're not on the same page, and no change will happen until they are on whatever page they all need to be on. So they all have to work together. But I do think that at some point, finance says, we cannot. We need to find something. And then you can have a more robust conversation.
I love that. I mean, you've talked a lot too about the idea of pinpointing what is fixable and what isn't, and being very transparent when you're talking to prospects and employers about that. Can you talk a little bit more about why that's so important and how maybe you have those conversations without turning them off or chasing them away, just being honest and frank while still, pointing out the things that you can do?
I think that fixing some parts of health plans is pretty simple, and fixing other parts is much more challenging. And I always try to keep top of mind for everybody in the room that people are not widgets. And, this one may be fine and has a horrible medical event in 6 months or a year or 2 years. And this horrible thing that you've got going on over here may be done in a month. And then you've got this kind of mid-level thing that's going to go on forever. And what do you do about that? So I think, those are different kinds of things that need to be addressed differently, for lack of a better word. But I think the basic, make sure your contracts are good and that you understand what's going on, allows a more robust conversation. So I think it's not a one size fits all. It's, you really have to kind of tailor it, because not every employer has the same problem either. Somebody may have an MSK problem, and somebody may just be paying too much for prescriptions, and somebody else may have 3 cancer claims. And we looked at something the other day where they've got a myasthenia gravis. I've never seen that in my lifetime. It's very expensive, right? So you got to kind of navigate all of that. There is no one thing.
Yeah. Well, kind of following up on that too a little bit, the roles of advisors are shifting so much. I'm sure from the time that you've started, it's a whole different world. I mean, I hear that all the time of like, I never knew I'd have to be an expert on all of these different things and have a crystal ball and try to predict what's coming next. And like you said, be a general contractor and find all these different partners to work with. I mean, as you look ahead to the next few years, the role of the advisor, like, what do you think are some of the most important skills that either current advisors or somebody who wants to get into this field need to develop and work on?
Change management, human psychology. More and more employers are going to ask their employees to change how they engage in the healthcare system. And it's very personal to people. It's their person, it's their spouse, it's their children. Those are very personal things, and people want to make sure that they can get what they need. But I will tell you that people who have encountered the medical system would do anything for a change, because it's awful to deal with for the most part. And I don't mean that the care delivered is bad. That's not what I mean. But the whole process around it is so hard for everybody, not just the patient, the employer, the hospital, the outpatient facility, the people that sit at the front desk in doctors' offices. My gosh, they have the worst job in the world. Everybody's yelling at them from every direction. I mean, it doesn't help anything. They have no decision-making capability whatsoever. And I am very frustrated when they look at an ID card for one of our plans and say, we don't take that, when I know they do. But I understand, right? Doctors are penalized if their patients' bills are not paid. Did you know that? It is a big thing in San Antonio right now. It's terrible. We've had it happen twice where we literally prepaid. Either the employer got out their credit card or I did, because they were sure they were not going to be paid by the plan. I mean, that's crazy.
No, you're right. And watching The Pit, which, that's obviously real life. No, but just your point about the front desk. I mean, man, of all the jobs I would not want on that show, and I wouldn't want any of them, that one is probably the worst. Because like you said, they're the front line. They're getting all the frustration. They're getting everything funneled right into them. So no, it's a really good point.
And, I use my own examples because, they're mine. I can talk about whatever I want to talk about, right? But my mother, when she was still alive, I had gone with her to the cardiologist, and she was going to have a procedure. This was the appointment to determine if she was eligible for the procedure and ask all the questions and do all the due diligence and all of that. So we finish, and it was just a matter of getting the procedure scheduled. And I had somewhere to go. My mother was like, just go, I'll catch you up later. And so I left, and she didn't call me for like 3 hours. And I was like, did you forget? And she said, no, I just left. I said, what do you mean you just left? She said, that poor woman behind the desk. Somebody brought her lunch. She couldn't eat it. It took her 2 hours to go to the restroom. She said, people just kept landing on her and I just kept waiting. And, that's okay for my mother. She didn't have anywhere she needed to be. That's fine. But that's not good for anybody else.
So, how do you balance calling out the issues and problems that, we've kind of talked about today and the ones you see every day with also trying to remain positive and inspirational?
I don't know that I try to remain positive and inspirational. I think that's not, I try to call out systems and I try very hard not to call out people. I think there's a very big difference in how information is received when you're talking about a systemic issue. I'll often tie that to how it impacts a person, but I try not to insult people. I don't think it's the right thing to do, and I don't think it's going to get us where we need to go.
I love that. Well, if you've listened to the podcast before, we usually like to wrap up this first part with just putting you on the spot a little bit and asking you to just finish this sentence in, a couple words or a couple sentences. But the sentence we'd like you to complete is, the thing that makes me most excited about the future of our industry is...
People are realizing that change is possible and that the change is not all bad.
Perfect answer. Good stuff. All right. Well, then we always like to close out with just getting to know you a little bit better, a few fun questions. So as we've touched on throughout this conversation, this industry is exciting. It is innovative. There's a lot of good things happening, but realistically, it's also pretty rough on advisors. It'll chew you up and spit you out. It'll wear you down. So
that it will.
As somebody at the forefront who's trying to create that change, how do you find some time to relax and refresh? You talked about the occasional 2 p.m. hair appointments. I'm sure that might play into it a little bit, but what else do you do to kind of relax and refresh and make sure that you don't get burned out?
So I think that physical activity and sleep are very important. And I know that those are such boring answers. It's pathetic, but they are. And I find that when I sleep and when I get a little exercise in the morning, then I'm much more able to manage whatever it is that life throws at me. And I'm also happiest when there is a trip on the calendar. So if that's a personal trip, then that usually means a trip across a pond, whichever pond you like. And that is my food and cultural activity and people watching fill my cup with that activity. And if it's domestic, that often these days means a work trip, and we all have plenty of those. And I think that is a wonderful way to see how airports build character.
That's for sure. I mean, you predicted one of the questions we were going to ask, so I'll just jump in here and ask, what is a recent trip that you really loved or something upcoming that you're really looking forward to, speaking of hopping across the ponds?
So I had a trip to Croatia in May, and we started in Slovenia, and then we drove all the way down to Dubrovnik over the course of about 10 days. And then on the way back, my friends came back to the US, and I stopped in Paris for a couple of days, and that is my happy place. And I saw some friends and had some great food and found a champagne bar and learned a whole host of things about champagne and drank champagne that I will never be able to get in the United States, which is very frustrating to me. And then I came back and nobody missed a beat while I was gone. And that was the best news of the entire trip.
Oh, see, that's when you know you're doing it right. Well, you and I need to have a separate conversation because my wife and I are headed over to London and Paris in September. So I need some recommendations, but I will follow up with you separately.
You will never get me to shut up about it.
No,
I was going to say that champagne bar. Woo.
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
I wish I could go there.
So it's called Bubble Bliss, and it is this cute little place in the 6th. And, one of the things that I have a love-hate relationship about Paris is that it is the city of craft. And it is much more important how you do something, and the respect for the artist or the craftsman is above anything else. And so to talk to a sommelier who, when he was doing his SOM certification, spent about a month and a half in the United States and asked me where I was from. He said, "Oh, I've been to the Salt Lick." It's like, what? And he had been to a number of wineries that I like in the Hill Country winery area. And so we had a nice conversation about that. And then he told me all of these things. And he didn't assume I was an idiot, but he didn't assume that I knew everything. And I also gave him I'm like, they have 10 bottles by the glass. I said, I'm going to drink a few, your choice. And he's like, okay, you're going to start here, then you're going to have this, then you're going to have this. And it's a very good thing that I didn't have to drive to get home.
That's the best way to do it. Hand it over to the experts, right?
Yep.
I love it. Well, we also like to ask our guests for recommendations about whether, books, movies, TV shows, podcasts, anything you would like to recommend to our listeners.
I am a huge fan of the Diary of a CEO podcast. I suspect most people have heard of that by now, but I think that Stephen Bartlett is such a wise person and in such a young person, and that makes me feel very old to even say that, is really astounding. But I've also read a couple of great books recently. One that really was very interesting to me was called The Correspondent, and it's about a woman that writes letters, which sounds so dull. It is so not dull. It is just a fascinating story. I loved that book. I'm in the middle of Scaling by Benjamin Hardy right now. That one's on audio. Those are the last couple that I've read or listened to. I try to read the same number of books that the 4-digit year ends in. So 26 this year.
I love that. And you get brownie points from me for not just mentioning business books. Like, I love the business books, but you mentioned The Correspondent. You throw in some fiction or something like that. And on this podcast, that always gets you a little bit of extra love.
Well, thank you. But I think if you only read business books, you don't develop your whole personality. And I think you can learn and understand about experiences you would have never had otherwise by reading somebody's story or a fictional story about something.
No, for sure. I mean, touching on AI, I think that is only going to become more important moving forward, is to continue to connect with humanity through art and other things. So love that.
I think that's, and I didn't do this because I knew AI was coming, but, we're a small team. We've always operated in the let's work at the highest level, and the highest level of what we do is human. It is not read contracts, move this data here, there. That's fine. That all needs to be done. But the highest value is human. And I think that will only grow as we move forward.
Yeah. Good stuff. All right. Well, the last one, since we talk to people from all over the country here, we always like to just learn a little bit about all the different corners of the U.S. So we'd love if you just share a couple of insider secrets about your area in San Antonio and the surrounding area, best kept secrets, favorite restaurants that you're willing to share, bookstores, hikes, anything like that you want to share with people.
So I live in Texas, and we really do think we're our own country here. So when you kind of come with that attitude, it's a little easier. And I think the other thing that people are always surprised at is that we do like to eat really good food. We just like to eat it in shorts. So we have a very vibrant culinary scene here, but it is not a formal dining experience kind of place. Yes, we have a couple of places like that, but we have a Culinary Institute of America here, which is such a gift to San Antonio. And we have a lot of young chefs that come out of that, and they start food trucks before they open their first restaurant, which I think is a great way to, does something scale? Do I want to do this? So we get a lot of different and really interesting things here. And we have some great areas where a number of entities have come together to create work-life play spaces so that there is life where there is business, and you don't necessarily have a downtown that's empty. You have areas of town that are busy from morning to midnight, and that's really interesting to me too. And we're very particular about our barbecue here.
Yes, I have heard that.
And it can get a little heated.
Yes, I totally advocate for that. I think people should have regional pride. And when it comes to food, I'm all for having strong opinions, but I will just say when it comes to barbecue, I am willing to just believe everybody that they have the best, as long as they'll just let me eat it. So I don't care if it's Nashville or Texas or Memphis or whatever. I'm like, as long as I get to eat it, I will agree with whatever you say. But
I think that's a very healthy way to think about barbecue, because it's so different in so many different places, and it's all really good.
Exactly. Mentally healthy, maybe not so much on the waistline, but yeah.
I was going to say, if I have brisket and mac and cheese in front of me, I'm so happy. I'm so good. Or cornbread. Oh, so good.
But I like the flat of the brisket. And That is not quite brisket that everybody else likes.
Yeah.
I like flat and burnt ends and macaroni and cheese
Oh,
and a
yes.
good beer.
I love it.
Yeah.
Burnt ends and champagne. You heard it here first.
I think that's a pretty livable diet.
I agree. Awesome. Well, Allison, it was so great catching up with you. Thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, we look forward to connecting with you again very, very soon.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure to talk with you.
For all of our listeners, please subscribe to Beyond Benefits with Benefits Pro anywhere you get your podcasts. And if you want to rate us, we'd love your feedback. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to email me over at pwilson@benefitspro.com, or you can email Lily at lpeterson@alm.com.
And thank you to our producer, Zach. Join us again next time for a new episode of Beyond Benefits with Benefits Pro. Until then, thanks for listening.